we have the UN, we don't listen to the UN, we don't regard the UN, we want to break it as quickly as possible. I say we because in our weakness, we have not been able to stand up to say no to those that want to destroy it. It's a collective responsibility.
It's so interesting that you say that, because you are actually in Sierra Leone facing a rather specific example of dealing with those powers, the leading powers that are leaning more and more every day toward just going it alone, kind of blowing up those multilateral institutions. In the case of Sierra Leone, let me ask you a more specific question that I think is symbolic of the bigger problem here. You are a developing country in need of economic growth, and you're also finding yourself the victim, one of the many victims of the US tariff war now, even though you import far more than you import far more from the United States than you export to the United States. Still, you're getting hit with the 10% tariffs, and it's not your biggest trading partner, I know, China and is in particular. But all revenue matters, and it is disproportionately unfair. So tell us how Sierra Leone, how a state in your standing can go up against that power in this example.
We have to stop being lazy and put our thinking caps on. I think the dependency syndrome is what we need to completely get rid of. The human being can be quite ingenious, and that is what we are going to do. We are going to think deep and structure our economy in such a way that we can establish new relationships, now that we know that certain relationships are not reliable. We have to not only rely on, as a matter of fact, it's an irony. We had support from USAID. What is on paper is close to $40 million a year, but what really we can account for was about $13 million. So, I mean, we can lose. It's important for the various projects that they support. But that does not mean that we cannot continue to exist. It means that we have to be more active in terms of domestic revenue mobilization and how we apply those revenues to the needs of the people rather than argue over the fact as to what we should do. We definitely do not have the strength to be able to impose retaliatory tariffs. So, in our small state, we do what we can to continue to survive, waiting for a better day to come. And that is when we will all come back to the forum and realize that multilateralism in this world that we live, where we are all interdependent, however weak we are, is the only way to go.
Okay, we all seem to agree that multilateralism is needed, but when it is being, constantly demeaned by leading powers, you talk about, President, forming new relationships. So let me ask Mr. Yang here, if those new relationships ultimately equate to the new world order we keep hearing so much about, could it lead to the rise of the global south that many are seeing, and would that ultimately change the infrastructure of global diplomacy, especially at the United Nations?
The first remark is that the global south is rising. The speed might not be what we're looking for, but the global south is rising and will rise. However, I thought I would now say that multilateralism is in a difficult situation. International cooperation isn't as brilliant or as great as we thought it should be. However, we are not condemned to death. It's not a death penalty. Presently, there is more and more discussion about reforms. In fact, the word reform is a very big word. You could call it adaptations. Because the UN has been around for 80 years, Charles Darwin warned us that if an organization or organism doesn't adapt itself to changing circumstances, it will be in difficulty, it might even die. So the UN has now to make some adaptations, some reforms concerning the UN Security Council and even the General Assembly, which I chair. And the reforms for the UN Security Council are absolutely necessary. The President mentioned that in the UN Security Council there are 5 permanent members. The government of the United States already made a public statement that there could be 2 more permanent members from Africa. Well, this is not still being discussed. And other people think that an organization which in 1945 had 50 members and had 11 Security Council members, then 15. But the 5 have not changed, the 5 permanent members. So in order to get everybody into the tent in 1945, they had to create the veto, which means there are 5 countries which can block a decision which is not in their interest. So it creates an imbalance which is a bit difficult to manage. But this, again, can be looked at closely. And I'm very hopeful that the great powers, the 5 permanent members, eventually will understand that to make the world function better, we ought to make reforms or adaptations in the UN Security Council. There is also at the level of the General Assembly a word which is commonly used. They call it revitalization of the role of the General Assembly, which means that the General Assembly should be playing a greater role than it has before. All these reforms will give the world a United Nations which is better adapted to the world in which we live. Because no one can run away from this. You don't even need to wait for a crisis. We don't need a 3rd World War. Because if there's a 3rd World War with nuclear weapon, I don't think we all survive it. You'll probably not survive it. I wouldn't survive it. So we don't need a 3rd World War. We can make all the changes without looking for something that is horrific. So I am convinced that all these changes can be made. And in all this, the Global South has played an important role and will play an important role. And the Global South is asking for changes in the Security Council, in revitalization of General Assembly, but also some adaptations in the international financial organizations. For instance, Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, were created. They've done a marvelous job. But when they were created, the 3rd world wasn't present at the UN. Now we need to adapt the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to the changing circumstances so that the Global South can have a better voice in those organizations. I would even add the WTO, or the World Trade Organization, creates conditions to make globalization more favorable to everybody on earth. But again, the 3rd world has to play a greater role in all this. So the Global South will play a greater role, enjoy better benefits, but we need to reorganize the international community. Thank you.
Okay. Until or if we see the global community reorganized in that sense, let me look with you, Borut Pahor, if what we're dealing with today, which is still the structure of the UN Security Council and the 5 major powers, Slovenia, being a Slavic state and formerly part of the Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia, you are familiar in dealing with Moscow. Do you think at this point, because it is crucial, that the West is dealing with Russia the right way? Or is there still too huge of a gap, and I feel it could be even a growing gap, in misunderstanding, especially in diplomatic language, between these powers?
Number one, Russian Federation has been an aggressor to Ukraine. Number two, Ukraine has been a victim to this aggression. Number three, if there will be a peace negotiation, the government of Ukraine should be there. Nobody has the right to decide on the Ukrainian future without the Ukrainians. Number four, I think would be very useful to invite also a European Union, because it's there, and the political will of Ukraine is to join once European Union. And European Union has been, a part of this support to Ukrainian government to fight against the aggressor. So everybody, I think, would like to see the peace once there. But this peace, ma'am, should be, just and should be a lasting peace. If it will not be just peace, will not be a lasting peace. So what I am afraid of is that somebody will push the agreement so far that the solution would not be fair. If the solution will not be fair, Moscow will have appetites to go on. So as Prime Minister and as President of my country, I have met many times President Putin. What I'm bothering with is his philosophy of Russian Federation being a center of some sort of a sphere of interest where some countries should be there with them. And Ukraine is one of the countries that should be in this sphere of Russian interest. But the will of Ukrainian people is different. They would like to be in the sphere of interest of European Union and possibly NATO. So that we are debating today, this is a clashes of superpowers that they are creating once again sphere of interest, and the question for the future is where those limits, borders between sphere of interest will taking place. It's not just Ukraine, ma'am. It's also Western Balkans, with Serbia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and all that stuff. I think we should do whatever it takes that all countries there will be a part of European Union before somebody would have an appetite to go there and to provoke once again a conflict there. So, listen, as we said before, unfortunately, Security Council now is not operating in a mood that it should operate. Slovenia is a non-permanent member of Security Council. Sometimes I am very happy that it's there, that it's making, our influence to the decisions. But many times, I am so, in a way, sorry that we are not capable to do more for the problem in Middle East, for the problem in Ukraine and Russia, for other conflicts all over the world. Pay attention. 55 conflicts are going now, this very moment, in the international community. And the optimism is not very well, positioned at this very moment, because the general question is, and I'm finishing the answer to your question, once again, the ultimate question is, we will go through this transition period without using force all over the places. So, Mr. President, the General Assembly should play a more significant role. It is in your capacity to do more already now. And to the question of Security Council, I think that one of pillar of transition, of reform of Security Council should be to get out of veto. Why 5 countries or 7 countries would have a special right to do something or not to do something in comparison with all others? I think this is just not a fair solution. But I'm very real. I know that at the end of the day, if U.S. would not have a special rights, if Russia would not have a special right, with China would not have a special right, there is a question if they would like then to participate in solving the world's affair. So we should be at least so fair to the next generation, to our children and the children of our children, at least to try to make the UN better, because this is the only institution which could provide a peaceful transition to the next stage of international development.
How do we even begin to try when these powers are so heavily invested in their positions in the United Nations? They will never cede that power because it allows them to do what they do more and more so every day. How do we begin to try to reform?
Yeah, well, if I would have, I mean...
You had the proverbial magic wand then.
No, I mean, I could have an answer to your question, but it's up to them to finally see that if we will go on in a way that we are going now, we will not come anywhere. So better to start to think now than to postpone this debate to the time that would be maybe just too late.
Okay. Let me move to the president of Sierra Leone, because it's deeply frustrating, especially, as you suggested as well, for African countries to have the population you have globally and not have the voice or any of the weight, especially at organizations like the United Nations. Now, there are several other African multilateral organizations, regional in particular. Many have complained they're not serving the purpose either that they should have in representing Africa on the international stage as well. What would you suggest African nations can do to collectively strengthen their voice in international multilateral institutions like the UN?
Well, we have the regional organizations. These are mostly economic, and they've been doing quite well in terms of keeping our regions quiet and also integrating the economies. We have, of course, the region itself, the continental body, the AU, and we are also facing difficulties because when the center cannot hold, it becomes difficult for every other part to hold, and that is what is happening. But for Africa, in terms of representation at the Security Council, 10 of us have been mandated to think and coordinate about that, and I am the coordinator of those 10 countries. And we keep harping it at the UN and at every other forum to convince the 5 permanent members for Africa to be represented. Before today, none of them had accepted. But like the president said, all of them have now accepted that Africa should be there and it should be a priority. But of course, there are other huge nations and other regions of the world that are fighting for representation at the Security Council. How the steps we take to get there is what is now to be defined. But all the 5 permanent members have been able, and I led a campaign when I was president of the UN Security Council in August last year, and took the taboo subject of UN security reform to the UN itself. And that was how we were able to get the US after to accept that, yes, Africa should be represented. But we all keep talking about a conflict of a global nature before maybe a change will come about. I believe that we have a world war going on. It is not of arms and ammunition, but it involves everybody. And until we accept that this is a war, the denier I spoke about earlier is going to deprive us of the opportunity to see the need for a change at the international level. As I speak today, the many conflicts that are going on around the world have been totally forgotten about. We are talking about tariffs. As I speak, if you open the TV everywhere, it's about tariffs. That is affecting everybody. That is a war.
Okay, if I can, I'd like to ask you kind of a more specific example then about how you're going to deal. We spoke about it in your first answer, but I spoke to some South Africans in particular who were quite split on how their president, Cyril Ramaphosa, reacted to Trump, warning him, we won't be bullied. Some said, wait a minute, we can't afford to stand up right now to the US. So just be quiet, suck it up, for lack of a better phrase. Others said, no, wait a minute, we have this thing called pride, and we can stand up for what's right. Which is wiser, coming from an African perspective?
I think the world is a big place. We can reorganize ourselves. And that reorganization is what we need to do. The human being is quite ingenious, and under pressure, we are going to do that. Maybe we have been shocked, and we are all scrambling as to what to do. But I tell you, one nation, yes, can be powerful, and we accept that. And we have given the respect and place. But we just need our own respect too, as nations of the world representing people, and we want to be heard. So I think collective decision at this point in time, insisting on diplomacy, insisting on multilateralism, and coming together to work together for the rest of the world is what we need to do. Maybe a new leader will emerge, and maybe a new organization that we have the same attributes of the United Nations is what we need. One that respects and values all the others. That is not currently what we have, and that is why, he was saying that the UN General Assembly should be more assertive. I pity our Secretary General. He's lost voice. He keeps talking and nobody's listening to him.
Prime Minister, to go ahead. You had a comment.
I mean, we are all watching this trade war, and it's, in my view, it is amazing. It is unbelievable that the key word of this trade war is respect. You know, I do refer to the statement of President Trump when China has, raised their tariffs. And he said, and I'm trying to quote him, this is disrespectful to the United States. Come on. I mean, we are talking about the respect when we are talking about the trade. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is really unbelievable, which brings us to a conclusion that it's not just about the deficit, it's not just about, taxation, it's not about national debt, it's the repositioning of United States and international community. The basic word of Trump's policy is power. He would like to be seen as the most powerful politician, as of the most powerful nation in the world. And everybody who would not, be in favor of such a position would reacting disrespectfully according to his view. I mean, this is really, amazing watching this in 21st century.
It is amazing, and unfortunately, he's not the only example. He's definitely the loudest
example.
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
He's the loudest example, not least because the U.S. is the most,
at least
arguably.
He's very open, yes.
Yeah, but what's different about this time now is the direction in which more and more state leaders and diplomats are going.
Yes,
there is no longer the language of diplomacy as we knew it. It's not okay to sit back and be polite. And I don't say that, as to minimize what diplomats do. It's incredibly important to know how to listen and talk to people.
The time of political correctness is over.
Is it though? Do we need to get that back? Because diplomacy doesn't seem to function without it.
In a more sincere way, because the lack of sincerity has devastated the political correctness. And mentioning President Trump has been one of the first who recognized this lack of sincerity in political correctness of liberal democracy and, got the, some sort of result out of it.
Well, if he doesn't want it that way, then we have to question if his way will work. Or again, is he looking to blow up the entire system and disrupt? They love this word in the Trump administration, We're disrupting. To what end? We don't know. They don't seem to have clarity on how this is all supposed to work if we've changed the fundamentals of diplomacy.
Well, what is good is that basically a couple of days ago, he watched the stock market and bonds market and all that stuff, and he has seen the problem there, and he reacted to it. And he then, announced this 90-day pause. At least I think there is some sort of rationality at the end of the day. Let us hope that it will prevail.
We will see. We will see. I'm not going to say anything because the volatility that's created alone is still as disrupting as having almost
completely unnecessary. Completely unnecessary.
Indeed, indeed. And we'll see. This is only a 90-day pause. We have to see where this all goes. So I'll tell you what. We have kind of a final question for all three of you before we wrap this panel. Because all of you have been elected to office. You have all been chosen by your people to do what is in your people's interest. So does the global population now, do you think they need and that they want the global rules-based order? Or do you feel that there is too much of a sense of nationalism in too many countries and this idea that it's better if we go it alone? Go ahead.
It will never be better if we go it alone. Diplomacy at the end of the day is the most powerful weapon. It could be trade wars, it could be other types of wars, but you always end up at the diplomatic table. Even when we don't see people discussing under the table, there's a lot of diplomacy. And by the way, all the wars we have known in history end up at the diplomatic table. And if we were very wise, we shouldn't kill anybody before we begin to discuss. We should, in fact, instead of going to kill millions of people, go to the table and discuss. Now, see, the Middle East, Russia, Ukraine, they're all ending up at the diplomatic table. The 30 Years' War in Europe ended up with the Treaty of Westphalia, diplomatic table. You can look at all of them. The First World War, it was the treaty in Paris that brought it to an end. The League of Nations, unfortunately, didn't work because there were no vetoes. Now, the United Nations is working because it was put in place. Everybody is in the tent. The League of Nations, the US couldn't enter because the US Congress didn't agree. So diplomacy remains the most powerful weapon given to humankind. Negotiations are the most powerful weapon. In fact, if you don't negotiate, you can fight and kill each other. You never solve the problem. So I'm very comfortable and I'm confident and optimistic that diplomacy is still the way we're going to go in future. You don't need another United Nations. We can fix this one. We can adapt the system, and we will keep working so that it works in the interest of every human being. It's unfortunate that the UN put the member states, the nation state, as the key player. But there has been no way to go otherwise. You can't go private. You must use the states, the nations of the world. And we can correct these errors, correct the difficulties, and keep running a world which will be by far better than we know. There's been a lot of progress. There used to be a lot of wars all over in Europe. We no longer have them. I mean, there was once in a while, but we're not all fighting. So diplomacy is key. The UN is the organization of the future. If it didn't exist, we would create it today. Thank you.
Let me ask, but it's interesting there because, Prime Minister, I'll let you speak now to this. The examples cited on why we need diplomacy and why it's worked have all been negotiations after a war. We do not want to sink into another war. We need diplomacy to work now. How do we recreate the language to adjust to these incredibly loud and so-called disruptive voices so that we don't sink into conflict before we have to revert to the diplomacy that worked decades before?
Well, from a historical point of view, I think we need some sort of good practices. If now we would be able to solve in a fair way the conflict in Middle East, the conflict in Ukraine, that would be some sort of renaissance of hope that we are able, with the diplomacy, to solve the international conflicts. If those conflicts will not be solved by peaceful way, there will be a general disappointment with diplomacy, and we will go back to the nationalism. So, being a liberal guy, believing strongly in multilateralism and a global market, I hope so very much, as I said, that at the end of the day, the reason and our historical experiences will prevail.
President Bio, and we actually do have a few more minutes, so we might even be able to get another question in. But President Bio, from your perspective, because you know, as we know, Sierra Leone suffered a terrible war. Negotiation had to end that conflict as well. Do you feel there's anything learned from your example, having experienced it firsthand, that can serve what we're seeing today to make diplomacy work, and make it work before we spiral further downward as a global society?
Certainly. We had an 11-year civil war, which was quite brutal. So many people were killed. Many were, had their limbs chopped off, hacked off, in one of the crudest wars in Africa. But at the end of it all, we had to finish that war on the table, not with weapons, but by understanding, respecting the views of others, and making sure that we come together to resolve our differences. The President of the General Assembly is quite right. There is no need to kill before you go to the table. You can start on the table. But it's always been a part of our arsenal as human beings to go and fight, to try to establish supremacy at the war front. But the cost is high. And it can only lead to more hostility, and it does not solve the problem. After nearly 11 years, I was a part of that war as a soldier, and later as a leader, I decided, even as a soldier, that this war will not end at the war front. I am going in search of the leader of the rebel movement, and everybody said, no, it will not work. I was myself regarded as a rebel because I decided to go to talk to him. But at the end of it all, I knew what I wanted, and I had done a proper appreciation of the battle to know that we cannot finish at the battlefront. I, using contacts, was able to directly meet with the Fode Sanko at the time, who was the rebel leader, and I brought him to the table. After nearly 6 years, call it a marathon peace process, we agreed. And with the support of the United Nations, again, and many other nations around that had a peacekeeping contingent in Sierra Leone, we ended the 11-year civil war. And now we are trying to be a democracy. But the examples we are getting, even from mature democracies, is quite worrying. Yeah. It's not only diplomacy that is at stake and multilateralism, but one of the most important governance systems, democracy and liberal democracy. We see our brothers and sisters being deported, but like I said, we have to adapt. They come home, I say, welcome back home. This is where you left. You are welcome. I cannot send my citizen back or refuse to accept them because they've been deported. We have to adapt. And again, now when you go to Sierra Leone, you see that we are living peacefully. And you start to wonder, why were you killing one another in the first place? So, like you said, it's always good to get together. But in any gathering of different people, there should be respect. There should be regard for the culture and the opinion of other people. However strong you are, In fact, it is a moral obligation of the strongest to take care of the others. That is what is lacking in this international system. It is the desire, the unbridled desire of the strongest to become even stronger.
Yeah.
I don't know, you cannot go beyond being strongest. So if we can accept that, I have enough power to even destroy the whole world. I have enough power to disrupt. We have not said no. That is why I said, let's adapt internally, and let's regroup, and let's collectively try to know how we can continue with living together in a multilateral system, but maybe that is properly structured with respect for one another.
We do have 2 more minutes, but that was such a glorious finish that I'd actually like to leave it there, unless other 2 panelists would like to say something off the back of that. Because, yeah, you do make the point that if the most prosperous countries in the world can't even hold up examples of good governance, right, with all the money in the what hope is there for a multilateral institution, and then for developing countries that need help and examples to follow? And we have a lot of work to do, I think, on regaining a language that we can all speak together, creating the examples that every country can follow, instead of narrowing it down to a few powerful, as too many people are calling them now, bullies on the global stage, deciding what everyone else should do, whether they want to or not. So I think I'm going to have to end it there. Really, I'd like to thank all 3 of you so much. What a fantastic panel. And thank you, everyone, for being with us. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.